Cold War Video Notes Part 3. So back to Germany. As you recall, we talked about how Germany was split into three different sections. Four quadrants. France, US, Great Britain, and the USSR, each taking one section. And then, of course, Berlin stuck there in the city, and we've talked about the Berlin airlift. But essentially what's going to happen is that the three zones are going to combine to create one Federal Republic of Germany. And so Stalin, of course, offers, hey, how about you just combine it with his zone and make one Germany, the German Democratic Republic. Again, I cannot help but laugh at the use of the word Democratic Republic for this communist state, or the fact that he was like, hey, no worries, why don't you just let me have it? We can just make Germany one. So anyway, the West obviously is going to refuse that, and West Germany is going to become a militarized zone. In 1958, Nikita Khrushchev is going to demand that the troops leave the city because essentially you've got a lot of folks, a lot of the educated elite that are leaving the eastern side to go to the west. A lot of the Easterners are shopping and spending a lot of money, spending a lot of time commercing over in the western side because, again, it's thriving. It's got that capitalistic market. So they've got a lot of problems with people visiting the other side and not necessarily sticking with the eastern side, which, of course, is a bit of an embarrassment. So when Khrushchev demands that, hey, the troops need to leave Berlin, it needs to become a free city because essentially he wants to go in and, take over all of Berlin, Eisenhower is going to refuse. And by 1961, as a matter of fact, that would be August 13th, 1961, 2 o'clock in the morning, the eastern side starts to put up barbed wire fence, and within days, they have the Berlin Wall constructed. Kennedy isn't alarmed. This is primarily because, hey, he still has his troops there. No big deal. And essentially, all the problems that they'd been having with the fact that there was no divide between the two cities was solved because the Easterners stayed on their side, the Westerners stayed on the western side, and so the Berlin Wall was born. So again, every year I try to help you imagine kind of what's going on here if that were to happen to something like us. Remember, all of the outside of Berlin, if you see in the picture, there is fencing all along here because, again, it's surrounded by the Soviet zone, the Soviet part of the country. It is this town that happens to be capitalist in the middle of the Soviet Eastern Germany. They also divide and put up a fence right down the center of the city. So you have East Berlin and West Berlin. So literally, folks, from 1961 on until the wall comes down in 89 aren't necessarily going to be able to visit or see their family on the other sides. They're also going to put up checkpoints. Checkpoint Charlie is one of the famous ones. Checkpoints along the way with snipers so that you can't get through, you can't go through unless you have proper paperwork. You have to have a reason to go into the west side. Not a whole lot of Westerners are going over to the eastern side, if you know what I mean, but the Easterners have to have a reason to leave because, again, the Soviets, the Germans, the Communists didn't want them to defect, to leave. They wanted to stop that brain drain from going into the eastern side, or the western side. So here's some more pictures, again, of the wall going up. You can see kind of the divided parts in between the two parts of the wall. Again, more space, more barbed wire, so again making it more difficult to get through until finally the wall is up. And this essentially goes down through the whole city. So, I guess all good things must come to an end. The death of Stalin occurs in 1953, and we did see this in the video. And one of the things that I really wanted you to make sure you knew about in the video was the fact that when he goes, his successor, Nikita Khrushchev, comes in. And the first thing he does is address Congress, and he attacks Stalin's policies. Essentially, he's saying, these things are not working anymore. We need to back off of Stalinistic tendencies. But again, he's speaking to a room full of die-hard Stalin supporters. So this is a big risk for Khrushchev. This is a big deal. He's speaking out and saying, basically, this man that we've revered as a god it wasn't necessarily making the right choices. And so de-Stalinization is something that usually gets a little bit of playtime on the test. You need to know that it relaxed worker controls. It wanted to diversify the economy. And because of de-Stalinization, standards of living improved. So hey, some things do work out that way. However, the effect of de-Stalinization all over the satellite nations is what usually gets focused on, because as you can see, it stimulates rebellion in these satellite nations. Poland and Hungary demand reform. They're going to rebel. Those conservative communist hardliners, the ones that were again, appointed by Stalin and Stalin followers, they're going to eventually force Khrushchev out. We'll talk about the specific incidents that is the incident that is the last straw, so to speak, and that's when Brezhnev is going to eventually take over in 1964. If you haven't already in your notes, you may just want to make a little timeline here so that we can kind of track who's in charge of the USSR all the way from Stalin up to the fall of communist Russia with Gorbachev, and then who takes over afterwards, just as a side note. So, all along in here, you're going to see some gray notes. They're part of another slide that had lots and lots of pictures that I wanted to slide in here for you, because yeah, we can't have a little bit of communist Cold War talk without talking about spies. And also, they go through all the different presidents of the United States and what was monumental, what was key to that particular president's years in office and the Cold War. So they're going to help you kind of put things in order, put things in timeline, perspective, and kind of keep things clumped and chunked up for you. So just be aware that anytime you see the gray background, that is trying to help you understand what's going on with the presidents of the United States. And here we have, of course, Alger Hiss. He's an American lawyer. He actually helped to establish the United Nations. They do find some traces of espionage, but he's never actually convicted. They couldn't make the charges stick. Next in our ring of spies, we have the Rosenbergs. Because again, who can't have communism time period without having a couple spies? The Rosenbergs were put on trial and convicted for espionage related to passing information about the atomic bomb to the Soviet Union. They pretty well tied Julius to the passing of the information. Ethel was a little bit more of a gray area. But again, looking at these two, how could you possibly think that, you know, that sweet little old lady and that kind old man, you know, she looks like Aunt Rose, she looks like Grandma Shirley. Surely she isn't passing information to the Soviets. And so people begin to become very distrustful of the other people around them. You know, if this guy who helped establish the United Nations and this innocent looking couple could possibly be spies, then spies could really be everywhere, which is where we get into and where we are introduced to a U.S. congressman named McCarthy. McCarthy is a Republican senator from Wisconsin who took it upon himself to make sure that he found every single communist in the United States. He thought there were large numbers of communist spies all over, spies and sympathizers, all over the United States, in the government, and practically any places with power and even without power. McCarthyism is one of those things that is, one of those phrases that is particular to this time because he is somewhat famous for calling in all of these people and accusing them of being communist. He eventually goes so far as to pull in a general and accuse him of helping the Soviets, and finally the general just says, basically, you've gone too far. Have you no decency, sir? This is a guy who's fought for his country, and McCarthy is accusing him of being a Soviet. He's eventually going to be censured the by the Senate for the tactics that he is using, and then he loses his seat and no longer is part of Congress. McCarthy is going to eventually pass. His death in 1957 was technically because of acute hepatitis, inflammation of the liver. So essentially, they hinted at the fact that he died of alcoholism. McCarthy and McCarthyism are synonymous with the idea of the Red Scare, particularly the second Red Scare. After we find out the Rosenbergs were spies, he's on this big mission, and he is actually, the term they use is a witch hunt. So there's a lot of parallels drawn between the actual Salem witch trials, where somebody says, there is a witch, no, that's a witch, and McCarthyism and his desire to hunt down communists in government and high-ranking positions. Oftentimes, though, he is associated with HUAC, the House Committee of Un-American Activities, and it's just important to note that he is a U.S. Senator. He's not in the House. Those were two separate things, HUAC and McCarthyism. Of course, with HUAC, they were known for that investigation into Alger Hiss that we just talked about, and for the investigation of the Hollywood film industries, that essentially where they're going to blacklist all the actors and the writers and the directors that they thought had some sort of ties to communism. And of course, this is infamously that HUAC is the same committee that pulls Lucille Ball in, accusing her of being a communist. Just things like that. So, being a commie, being a red, the HUAC is something that is completely separate from McCarthyism, and I just want to make that distinction for you. Next, we have Eisenhower, President Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was, of course, a World War II war hero. He's going to be around during and enacts the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. He is the president during the Korean War. He's the president during McCarthyism. This is kind of interesting. He creates the National Security Act, which essentially is going to become the National Security Act essentially creates the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. He's also famous for his Eisenhower Doctrine. So please make sure that you understand that Eisenhower has his own doctrine. So we now have Marshall Plan, Truman Doctrine, and the Eisenhower Doctrine. And that's where they're going to, where he's going to greenlight sending money to Middle Eastern countries in order to oppose the USSR. And this is primarily because of the Suez Crisis. If you remember back when we were talking about imperialism, Egypt had combined with France to build the Suez Canal, and then the British kind of sneak their way in and take control because Egypt is going to fall in hard times and not be able to pay back its loan. So when we roll around into the 1950s, the leader of Egypt is a guy named Nasser, Nasser, and he's basically going to assume control and want to assert more power over the Suez Canal. He's going to basically announce that he's going to nationalize the Suez Canal and open it up to anyone who wants to, be a part of the company. He's nationalizing the stock. He's taking the company public, if you will. And again, he's wanting to reassert his own Egyptian control. It's also important to note that this is a Muslim country. That's going to play into our situation here in just a moment. But essentially, when he does this, France and Great Britain move in and want to reassert their control. They're actually going to be in secret talks with Israel, and Israel's going to move troops about 10 miles off the coast of the Suez Canal, just to again kind of show force. So once again we have this idea of one side moving forward and being aggressive, the other side kind of pushing back. So France and Great Britain team up with Israel to kind of show force that, hey, we're still here, we're going to take control of the Suez Canal. And essentially, to make a long story short here, and you're welcome to kind of check this out if you want some further details, the United States is going to get involved. There's going to be a couple attempts to try and settle this peacefully through the United Nations, and they're all going to fall through. And then eventually the United States is going to pressure its own allies of France and Great Britain to back off. To let Egypt take the country back, or take the Suez Canal back, take control back, and it's actually going to end up working. And the United States is worried, and Eisenhower is worried, that Moscow might want to get involved, that they may want to team up with Egypt, and again we're in this idea of containment. We don't want communism to spread. We don't want Soviet Union to get any more control over any more countries than they already have. So Eisenhower in the spirit of keeping the USSR from getting involved, tells France and Great Britain to back off, which is actually going to cause a little bit of a rift in the United States' relations with Great Britain and France at the time, our allies, but essentially it stops and heads off a major confrontation down in the Suez. So Great Britain hands control back over to Egypt, eventually at the urging of the United States. Also, during Eisenhower's term as president, Sputnik is going to come about. Hopefully you can remember what Sputnik is. I'll give you a second to refresh your brain here. If you guessed the Soviet satellite to first orbit, then hey, you were right. Nice job. And with the USSR being the first one to make it into outer space, that of course is going to set off the space race. And this idea that America has to also go up and have objects, eventually astronauts, and get into that space race. Because if you can put a satellite up there, then you can put a missile up there, and they're really, fearful, one, of just the communists having anything better, more advanced than the United States. But they certainly don't like the idea of maybe possibly one day a missile being, pointed at them from the United States. Although I'm not entirely sure how possible that would have technically been. But hey, anything's possible, right, when you're worried about the communists? Also, he is in charge during the U-2 incident when the spy plane goes down in Russian territory. Of course, we mean the actual spy plane incident, not the band, although I wish, because they are one of my personal favorites. So essentially, the plane was shot down, the pilot was taken prisoner, convicted of espionage, imprisoned for 3 years, and all of this, of course, happens 2 weeks before the East and the West are supposed to meet at a summit in Paris. So it's very, very embarrassing for Eisenhower. Here is your picture of Sputnik. Isn't it exciting? So here are your checkup 3 questions. That last one is, what is Sputnik does? What is Sputnik and what does it start? What does Sputnik start? Please go to Edmodo and answer your questions.